means mark of pressure. Mark of, from pressure. 10 spirals of the golden mean, a top-down view of DNA. This is called Adam's apple. I guess it's supposed to be what it's like to be inside Adam's apple. Notice as the dodeca tilts that there is a hex view, a 6-sided view right here. And so in the hex view, you could see where the hex view, the cube, nests in the dodeca. And that's really the flower of life.
Sometimes you look at physics, which might be telling you that the fundamental forces are separate forces, and therefore you need to believe in separateness in general. And that could get you a little bit schizophrenic. So what I'm suggesting to you is that you realize that the fundamental forces which they say are separate, magnetism, gravity, the strong nuclear and the weak nuclear, are differences in the way pressures converge in one substance. And if you simply choose that belief, along with Christ and Einstein in the unified field, then you are forced to no longer think of physical and spiritual as separate categories, and you're no longer forced to think of mind and matter as separate categories. You have to think of one substance only, which is compressible, and that you get leverage on when you get leverage on those pressures in the jello. So essentially, the discussion about geometry becomes a discussion about how waves of pressure move around and nest in that jello. And that apparently what we're calling consciousness or self-awareness occurs when a particular geometry of pressures converge in that jello to allow donuts to nest in a very particular way based on what could be called Merkaba. This is a stellation of a dodeca, Ikasa. So if we did this to this, and then this to this repeatedly, inside out, outside in, inside out, outside in, we would have an infinite dodeca Ikasa nest. And that stellation, which has a 5-7 symmetry group, which we're going to talk about because it's the basis of the Anu, the human heart, and the heart of the sun, creates the archetype of the geometry for turning inside-out nest. Did you have a... Oh, okay. So what we're going to be looking at here is the principle of how pressures can turn inside out. The issue becomes essentially how, if pressures get persuaded in some way in a nest to approach center and store that nest of spin patterns or pressures non-destructively, then that permission to approach center allows a test for symmetry we call sharing, which becomes literally the test for pure intention. So what we're challenged with is to choose to feel that shape is a clue for how to feel. And more specifically, shape is a clue to choose how to choose the feeling of turning inside out, inside, which allows the feelings that were outside you to become inside you. And the mechanism that permits waves to turn inside out apparently is the same pattern of electricity we get around the heartbeat at the moment of love. So the plan today is we're going to have a little bit of conversation about how pressures nest, and we're going to do an experiment in touch, how you squeeze to say love, and then how you breathe to say love, and then we're going to talk about how those pressures nest in music. We're going to play the phi harmonic chord, which is sonic implosion, and describe how it's related to the concept Merkaba. And then we're going to talk about how the nonlinear harmonics which make those pressures able to implode, the microtonals, in the raga, and then we're going to do an experiment in breath as Maranisa plays. So we'll have a little conversation, then we'll stretch, and then we'll do this little kind of test to see can we do this inside ourselves. Okay? So don't think of this as just theory. This is actually something you're going to test in the way that you bend magnetism inside your glands. Okay? Because remember, if the universe is just made of these waves in the magnetic flux of things, then the way you bend that magnetism with your glands inside you is the way you have of fabricating ecosystems. Because, as Christ said, only love bends the light. And now we know what love is. Love is the fractal attractor of the recursion, of the turning inside out, that gives waves permission to approach center. And that's very attractive. And what that gives you is the power to steer the water wheels, to make the black holes. That gives you the still point axis to the 0 point, as it were. So this would be a language for understanding that we can actually choose how we assemble an electrical fractal in the electricity of the heart, and how that feeling is what we've been calling love. L turned from the circle to the line is an L, a phase shift as in Elohim. O into the circle of phi, pup, 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 phi. You start to make the phi spiral by saying phi, Lo phi, turn into the circle of phi recursion, okay? And that turning inside out starts the very dimpling, which is the archetype of Durnvall's wonderful images, to show in the flower of life the moment when the egg turns inside out is that moment when it learns how to dimple on the surface. That moment is the moment when something inside has learned how to implode, how to turn inside out, how to make that geometry, which is the ultimate attractor. So this will be an exercise of L into the O of phi. Or another way of saying that is L into the I of phi, which is turn into the focus of recursion, life. Okay? So here's a wave sort of wandering about through stubble, wondering what its excuse was for imagining itself separate. Okay? It's another way of saying how a soul gets born, right? And what the wave has to discover is basically, gee golly, here's a little wave of pressure meandering along, and it has no way to go in a circle without fighting with its neighbors unless it finds symmetry, okay? Now we measure the inertia in the wave, how much is stored, and we call that mass. Well, the wave doesn't store any inertia until it goes into a circle. So literally, what it is that teaches the wave to go into a circle is what creates mass, okay? And a wave doesn't get permission to enter the circle from the line unless it follows that sort of yellow brick road to Oz, that phi spiral, that turning inside out recursion that attracts it to go around something central. Very practical example. You wandered out in the field and you noticed there were geopathic zones all over the place, and you doused the map and it looks like a tangled fish net, right? And then you install a doused stone circle and a doused labyrinth on the water dome, and you align and columnate. And suddenly, all of the magnetic fields, which were trying to find their way into circles and couldn't find their way into circles from lines, suddenly have a place to turn inside out, to dimple, just like on the surface of that egg. And what happens? Geopathic zones in houses hundreds of yards go away. And because there's a drainage point for magnetism, a centering point, a spin path to the 0 point geometrically, which is what that is. And, oh, there's a thunderstorm, okay? Because the principle of crystallization is the principle of teaching the water vapor, the seed of symmetry, the convergence, the yang, the centripetal motion, which allows the vapor to learn to enter the droplet. So the actual process of creating rain is the process of creating that fractal. And specifically, the capacitive cone that Trevor Constable used on the Navy ship in weather engineering for the high seas was this 60-degree light cone here, which is a little bit more clear in the video. Well, let's just play. I guess it... Yeah. So you see that 60-degree light cone. Now there's 10 spirals of the golden mean when you see that from the top down, which is the top-down view of DNA. Okay? But from the side, it's a 60-degree cone. And that was the cone of the capacitor that Trevor Constable used, which had the most effect on the clouds. Okay? And the reason is because that's the conic angle of Merkaba. That's the conic angle if you take this dodeca here and you stellate it out to Icasa by phi ratio, and then you stellate this Icasa out to the next dodeca by phi ratio, the cone of dodeca inside dodeca like this is a 60-degree cone, which there are 12 of which that make Merkaba the mark of from pressure, the mark of pressure. It's another wonderful meaning to the term Merkaba. So if you think of the only mark that pressure can make, it's the ability to store pressure and to stand as wave. Because where there is pressure, there is flame. Where there is flame, waves have agreed. Where there is flame, there is mind, because mind inhabits flame. Mind is a name for the recursion that exists among pressures when they can converge centripetally. Okay? So literally, when the body learns to make this phylotactic, okay, motion, maximum exposure, minimum superposition, phylotaxis, or waves, that creates that little, you kind of feel it inside, like when you do your tetrahedral fire breath. If you notice that as you assemble the spins, you begin to feel a little bit of crackle, and it almost feels like you're at the center of a gyroscope, and that you're steering the gyroscope with where you vision the center to be, and that when you direct the OXY gene, O cross then branch U gene, oxygen, okay, when you direct the braiding algorithm, which is oxidation, when you direct the flame by directing the breath, by directing the oxygen, you create the centering force, which gives you steerage over the gyroscope. The nature of that gyroscope takes on power the more axes of symmetry it has. And what you start with, which is the tetrahedron, which is the two knees, the base of the spine, the top of the head, is the beginning of making a tetraoctacube, which then nests into the dodeca, and it's at that moment you call it Merkaba. And the way to understand that sequence of symmetries is to understand what the tetrahedron is, first of all. Cube octa, icasa, octa, tetra. If you see what the tetra is, it has 7 axes of spin, 4 vertex face center spins, like this. There's 4 of those. And then there's 3 edge center pair spins, okay, giving you 7 spins, which is the sequence of the layers of the heart muscle and the most symmetry of any shape. Okay? So that tetrahedron then has more ability to know itself because it is imperturbable from 7 axes of spin at once. So it's like instead of just having 3 gyroscopes navigating your spaceship, position indication, you've got 7. Okay, so you just can't get pushed around with your tetra. Okay? Now, if you take what that means, and the next step for the tetra, you see, and we'll use this model for this, you see the 2 orange tetrahedron in here? In the center, we have the two orange tetrahedron making a red octahedron in their center, and then the yellow cube. Now, I'm holding the cube parallel to the floor right now, okay? And note that those tetrahedrons are in a 90-degree tilt symmetry with respect to that cube. Okay, that's where you are when you're finished nesting your 2 tetra in the tetrahedral fire breath. Okay, you've got the 2 tetra in the cube. Now, the moment that 7-spin symmetry set, okay, can nest inside 5 spins. Now, let's give you a little clue here. Okay, 5 spins inside of 7 was the pentahept of the center of the Temple of Solomon. It was the sigil of truth of the Ophanim Enochian keys. It was the symmetry of the center of the heart muscle, the Anu, and the etheric clairvoyant vision of the heart of the sun. Is all 7 spins inside of 5 spins, or 5 spins inside of 7 spins. So we have to look here. We now know what our 7 spins are. We've got the tetracube. How do we nest inside of 5 spins in order to turn inside out? How do we finish making that Merkaba, that mark of pressure, where pressures can converge, nest, and implode? Well, what is the tilt angle of that cube with respect to the dodecahedron, the green? Okay, this is very important. We'll play some animations later, but if I take this yellow cube right now, which is parallel to the floor, and now I'm going to tilt that yellow cube like this, and now the dodecahedron is parallel to the floor. I just tilted that dodecahedron by exactly 32 degrees. Okay, the tilt angle of the chin of the Sphinx. Okay, The sacrocranial pulse idealized for creating the pump, okay? The ecstatic juice pump requires that leverage into that next axis of symmetry, which is the only language for next dimension. Okay, dimension is a name for the superposition of axes of symmetry. Okay, so now that cube, if at this tilt angle now, if I simply spin this like this, which Jonathan does so well with the strobe lights, okay, and I blink 5 times as it spins around once, I have exactly 5 complete cubes in that dodecahedron. Okay, so I have a new ratcheting stop action. I have 7 spins inside of 5 spins. Now, if you've ever seen the anu or the heart muscle or the heart of the sun, it's called a tourbillon, a scrollwork made of light in Moni Sadhu the Tarot. Okay? But it is the archetype of how you would braid light in order to create the anu, hydrogen, the human heart's muscular symmetry, and the clairvoyant vision of the heart of the sun. Okay? And what it is, it's 7 spirals moving around outside, surrounding 5 turns, helix of that spiral on the inside. Okay, so it's 7 turns inside of 5 turns. So, what we have, now we're going to discuss that more at the end of this conversation in terms of the Aku versus the Draku, the archetype of the sort of family squabble of the Hatfields and McCoys, so to speak, of the Ophanim, which were the family that sort of sponsored a genetic experiment here, okay? And it will get interesting because, you see, the Aku were those who bent the magnetism inside their body. They were steering galaxies around, and they used the glandular magnetism. Their bodies were the scale of galaxies. They were using their inner magnetism to fabricate ecosystem, inside out. Now, the Draku were using the magnetism outside, the Tron, okay, and they would use the magnetism outside in, and so they bent magnetism using the technos of the logos, technology, okay, and they created ecosystems with technology, okay, and that becomes the sort of Michaelic, Luciferic, Ahrimanic, Cain and Abel. It's this whole archetype of our genetic history. It's the Magdalene Jesus story. It's the 2 bloodlines, okay, and the issue between them is outside in versus inside out. Okay? Now, for this part of the conversation and introducing the music, what we want to do is find a way to make the information we've just used very practical, testable now inside our bodies. Okay? So, how are we going to do that? We have a few clues here. The clues we have is, gee golly, the quivering jello around here is just one compressible bowl. And shucks, where do I get leverage on the pressures? Okay? 2 ways. Where are the classic cases where you get to play with the leverage of pressure in order to create feeling? 2 simple ways. 1, how you breathe. 2, how you hug. Okay? So we're going to discuss the physics of hugging and breathing. It might even be phi cycle, right? Let's get physical. So, in the physics of hugging and breathing, we're going to test this spin path to a 0 point, and I'm going to suggest that some of this could be played with in terms of the Merkaba exercises as a way to create this convergence pressure envelope, okay? And we're going to do three or four things. Basically, we're going to try 2 breath exercises that test this spin path to 0 point. And then we're going to try a squeeze exercise, which tests the spin path to 0 point based in the Sentix literature on the envelope associated with love. And then we're going to later play some raga. We're going to talk about phi harmonics and nonlinear harmonics of the raga. And then we're going to play the phi harmonic implosion sonic from the digital hi-8 tape, where you create a sonic envelope, which is this geometry in the room, which has an implosive quality. And it's powerful, and it is appropriately associated with the Merkaba experiments. So how would we do this? Well, we now know exactly what that spin path to the 0 point is. there is absolutely no question that if a wave wished to re-enter itself non-destructively, the only angle it could use would be the golden mean spiral. That's why it is the idealization of not just translation of vorticity, but self-reference. Okay? And so then it is therefore the geometry of self-awareness. Okay? Because that's how something could be inside itself, inside itself, inside itself. Okay? Which is I am that I am, or as above, so below. So now, if we take that golden mean spiral and we look at it from the top, we saw 10 of them looking down. We saw the top-down view of DNA. But from the side, remember, it looked like a 60-degree cone? So let's see exactly what that cone looks like. And watch carefully, because we're going to do this in the breath. Okay? Hopefully. We get our show together. Okay, so here's the spirals moving. It's converging in a nest of dodecas containing the donuts of pressure. Okay, dodeca, icasa, dodeca. Okay, 60-degree light cone. Okay, so what is that path? If we take just one of those spirals, here's the top-down view of it now. Pause. Okay, I just paused the spin. Okay, now you see what that spin path to 0 point looks like from the side. It's the perfect caduceus. Okay, it is the mathematics of perfect damping. In other words, if you wanted to approach stillness, but do it with perfect braking, so you didn't touch the lightning without burning your finger, okay, that would be the spin path to the 0 point. Okay, it's like how you would slow down with the least trauma to your passengers. Okay, that's the spin path to the 0 point. Now, let's just revolve that a little bit more. So you now just kind of see how that's turning here. So if there were 12 of these approaching from all the directions, we would have a perfect Merkaba, dodeca, icasa, the symmetry of DNA, zodiac, Earth grid. Okay. Now from that side view, stop. So what did we have? What experiment are we going to do in our breath now? How did that look? It looked like this. Okay. Went up and down and up and down. Now, the relationship of each wave to the next wave was 0.618 in duration and in amplitude. Okay? So what are we going to do with our breath in order to do a spin path to the 0 point? Okay? The duration and amplitude of the breaths would be in this motion. Okay? It would be, this would be 2.618. The next breath, 1.618. The next breath, 1. The next breath, 0.618. Okay? Are you with me? And we keep doing that where the depth of the breath and the duration of the breath approach stillness without losing any spin along the way. Now that exercise is appropriate to do with music that is also nested like that. Okay? Okay? We're developing this idea, Mary Niece and I, about the Indian raga. Okay? That is, when we programmed the Korg M1 to make the 5 phi harmonic series of pure tonal ratios of perfect embedding, it was not possible to do it on any instrument, any keyboard instrument that could produce only octaves. It simply cannot be done. Okay? Because it is not a log 2 function. Powers of 2 don't get you there. Okay? Only powers of phi. So there's a group now building phi harmonic MIDI instruments, strumming instruments, University of Nashville Music Department, Wayne Kirby and Roy Wooten. Okay? So what we're looking at in the ragas, which were classically microtonal, would be that if you did frequency signatures of the classic most emotive tunings and displayed the wavelengths on a spiral instead of a line, like the cochlea of the ear, then you would see the recursion occurring. Just like in the Mayan calendric, when you display the event history in time on a spiral instead of a line, you can see recursion, repetition, okay, embedding in time. In fact, the book Spiral Calendar documents that ratio to be the square root of phi, which is the harmonics of the heart at the moment of love. Okay? So this creation of embedding is very much about what the nest of pressure and the nature of love teaches. So here's the suggestion. We'll do this breath exercise while Maranisa plays a raga for us for just about 3 to 5 minutes. There's a couple of things to sort of bear in mind. One is that you are starting with one breath, okay? Now, supposing you walked into a room and you had to make a decision as you walked into the room a little bit shocked at what's going on there to decide whether in your breath you're going to transmute the spin of that room from fear to love, okay? And the spin of the room changes from fear to love the way you plant the seed of its pressures, okay? Now, the breath that says love is very similar to the hug that says love, okay? It's the breath where the moment of maximum pressure occurs 0.618 into the duration of the event, breath or hug. In fact, if you try this little experiment, just as you're doing that, just kind of relax your hands and see if you could create a pressure at your dantian, okay? Visualize a kind of spherical pressure bubble at your dantian, okay? And this pressure bubble at your dantian is getting its envelope massaged, okay? And the massage of the envelope at the dantian is you're creating a cascade so that you could send a wave cracking down a whip, and the wave would never die, okay? The ratio that allows the wave to go down, cascading down from the long wave to the short, is phi, because it allows the waves to add and multiply. So what you do to start that wave is literally the same thing you did with the one breath to transmute fear into love. And that was the breath where the point of maximum pressure of the breath was 0.618 in the duration of the event. So as you're doing this with your breath, up and down, if there were a spring between your hands, okay, the spring would be doing exactly the same thing, okay? That the amount of pressure on that spring would be changing just like this, okay? So you're doing that experiment in pressure, and what you may find is that your skill at hugging improves, okay? And the reason is because you get a tingle in your body when the wave that was the long wave can cascade into the short. So in the Sentix literature, the wave that said love was that wave, the touch of the finger, the touch of the emotion. Okay, so we'll just relax, and we're going to do this breath exercise. Why don't we at least try to start together, okay? But then everybody move at their own pace, okay? Just do it a couple times where you cycle through this, where you go down to a still point, and then you stay in the still point, and you feel this tingle and presence for just as long as it's fun, okay? When your inner voice says, then you're done, and then you can do it again. And we'll just do this for about 3 to 5 minutes. And did you want to introduce the music?
Shades, a rainbow in between. It's a rainbow bridge between the colors. And there are different notes, different scales that are played like Pythagoras had prescribed. Different scales were played at different times of the day. And these were conceived in a devotional state. There is a rag, Bhairavi, which means the first rays of the morning sun. Ravi is sun, and Bhai means, it also means brother, Bhai. So it's an intimacy. But the other meaning is the first state of spiritual awakening, too, right? When the sun's coming up. So there's a note like this that comes. That note, that one note, in relation to the one, gives that. Do you feel it in your spine somewhere? That first ray. Here's another rag, Chandikidara, which is a full moon raga. And this rag, ascending goes. Excuse me because my no sound production very well, but. And the subject that we hold in the heart is like the love that inspired the Taj Mahal that Shah Jahan had for Mumtaz Mahal. After her form left, it was just more fullness. So that state, that quality of love, these are all different qualities of love for the divine, the one. And it's just a mass. It's just, everything is just more you, more you. So that's what Indian music is about, poetics. And now I think I'll play Chandikidara, the full moon raga. And the way to listen is just go inside your heart and listen as those you play.
Adam's apple. Notice as the dodeca tilts that there is a hex view, a six-sided view right here. And so in the hex view, you could see where the hex view, the cube, nests in the dodeca. And that's really the flower of life. So really, when we're trying to nest 3D into 4D, it's a matter of knowing this gateway from the 3-spin space to the 4-spin space. This is the golden mean ratio. It adds and multiplies. There's a lot of gravity here. In fact, this might even be something heavy if you were to really understand it. But sometimes it's okay just to look at the pictures too. This is how we get inside and outside of not just donuts, but ourselves. Thank you for nesting with me here. And now we're back on the top of the world. See how it would be like an attractor? There'd almost be like suction. Can you feel the suction coming down from the top? Because the nesting is so complete. Earth grid, DNA. The idea here was to see what's called the lambdoma of Lissajous, or the way waves phase lock.
And then if we go the other way, it makes the other signal faster. Here's the
There's two sounds interfering. Can you hear them? As the ratio changes, so does the picture.
forth. That's another one of the lambda. And here is the fifth. This is AHT, except instead of below the base stage, it's above the base stage. Notice that this picture is 90 degrees tilted from what the picture of the other AHT was, where I have the unit tone below instead of above pressure. Now, here, A and K again, but it gets kind of
Perfect octave.
where the moving tone is above the base tone, just the phase. Now this is the figure 8 phase shift. So it's figure 8 symbol for the octave, the figure 8 symbol for of DNA itself. You may get some sort of more than poetic intuition about the nature of the way in which love itself may be the solution to a data compression, that is, a problem of shareability, by looking at the way the convergence of two spirals of the golden mean makes an infinite recursive nest that you could zoom into forever. If you could compress data properly, it becomes infinitely shareable because it becomes infinitely spin dense. And that seems to be the path to the collective intuitive awareness, or in a sense, God. Tunnel is fractal. And we're going to talk about how that relates to an intuition about the purposes of our gene pool in this tape. The quality of the stillness. Thank you, Maranisa. Now, while we have that stillness, that kind of peace, for just a moment, and this could be a little bit strong, so let's just take this gently. We have a recording with us of the pure phi harmonic tone implosion sonics as played by Richard Schulman from the Assisi music from Assisi, on his Korg M1. Idealized 5-based harmonic cascade, which we're going to play in just a moment. Richard Schulman and I have worked with the mathematics extensively, and we've determined that the A below, is it A below middle C there? If
an octave and a tenth below middle C.
Which, if that A is decremented by minus 33 cents, we get a frequency of 107.9 hertz. If you want to just play that briefly then. Okay, and then the next note up, you would play the A, yeah, next note, oops.
The F.
The next note up is the F, 174.6 hertz, and that's the basic key signature which we're doing this. And then the next note up, 1.618 times that, is 282.5 hertz, which is the C sharp plus 33 cents. And the next note up from that is the B flat, 457.1 hertz, B flat minus 33 cents. So we've modulated the octave here. And then the final fifth note in the phi-based progression here will be F sharp plus, or F sharp minus 1 cent at 739.6 hertz. So together we'll have 5 notes in a pure Fibonacci cascade, and there is a palpable feeling of possible compression. Notice that also in the echo afterward, the possibility that the interference geometry of the heterodynes is such that you're actually producing
coherent nodal interference. When we played that in North Carolina, we had some things happen which were fairly serious. People reported feelings of compression in the heart. I tend to feel a little burning in my heart. And with the wide variety of psychological symptoms, a group was assembled to do research on harmonic implosion music, which I would call Merkaba sound. And it's been written up on the web page and elsewhere, and there's a group doing MIDI instruments based on this. It would be good to understand just how implosion works with regard to sonic and implosion. Dr. Ed Wilson was doing research at the Monroe Institute in which he was looking for the onset of transcendence by mapping the spectrum analysis of the brain EEG over the surface with many electrodes. And he had come to a definition of what transcendence was. When he got the flowering of EEG coherence at the extremities, he defined that as dissociation, which, if you think of it, is literally separateness, in that the onset of the glow, or literally the lighting up of the extremes of the hemispheres, is dissociative. It's a separateness. And conversely, when the site of the maximum EEG coherence, alpha, theta, delta as a harmonic series, was at the crown of the brain, he defined that as transcendence, particularly if it stayed there as a column of fire. Now, the way the lexicor works is you have about 32 channels of EEG, and you display green, yellow, blue, red to the temperature of the alpha, theta, delta harmonics. So you literally see the surface of the brain blossoming like roses in the springtime. Okay? And we propose to do the same thing for the planet. So what he had found was that he was playing Fibonacci heterodynes in the headphones, where you would play 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, okay, which is a Fibonacci progression. Now, if that progression goes to infinite, it reaches perfectly phi, 0.618033989. And you can map the way it gets there, because if you take 1 over 2, you get 0.5, then you take 2 over 3, you get 0.666, and if you take 3 over 5, etc., then 5 over 8 and get the ratio. When you draw that curve approaching phi, the golden mean, it looks exactly like what we just did. Okay? Okay, it is the spin path to perfect damping. So the Fibonacci progression is a spin path to phi. Okay? So what he did was he said, well, his problem was the same as Roy Wooten, who came to us and said, I'm a percussionist. Okay? I would like to teach implosion, centering, in the drums. And we scratched our head and said, well, gee, how do you play 0.618033989 as a ratio in timing? Excuse me very much. Right? Tricky. But then he said, but wait, we can do, and we had Glenn from the drummer from Paul Winter Consort with us when we did this, and he could do it. Him and Roy Wooten from the band in Tennessee, they could do 1 over 2, and then 2 over 3, and then 3 over 5, okay? And then 5 over 8, and these guys can do it. And then 8 over 13, okay? And then 13 over, and he's designed a MIDI instrument to do this. And guess what? That's exactly what Ed Wilson was playing in the headphones at the moment he got maximum transcendence, okay? He drove up to my farm after that. As soon as he saw the literature we just published showing the harmonic series of the EKG at the moment of love was a log function of phi. He said, my God, what's happening here, you know?
And now we understand not just the phenomena, but the principle. The principle is very simple. The principle is that when waves converge, let's see here, to do this we need this, and we need this, we need this. Let me get this down. Close. The principle, we call this Doxy, after Georgie Doxy. Okay, here are the waves, okay? You see these wavelengths? Now, I'm sorry this isn't in gorgeous color. We have a little glitch with our gadgetry here today, but the gorgeous color is over here if you can see it. But the waves are approaching each other in perfect Phi ratio, and as they do that, they feel alive, okay? This is an equation animated, okay? Except, look at that. It feels like somebody's about to breathe or talk to you there, right? It's obvious where the head is, okay? Why does that feel like it's self-aware right there? Okay? Now, if you did a side view of the waves going into dodeca Icasa, from every vertex of symmetry here, that's what it would look like on 12 of these, going to center. So here are the waves with permission to approach center. Now, why do these waves have permission to approach center in that geometry? Okay? The reason is because this wave here meets this wave here and says, oh, when these two waves get together, it's conjugal relations. Okay? And what happens is called phase conjugation, and that is that the waves create heterodyne beat notes. They have kids. Okay? And the way waves have kids is they do it by adding and multiplying the lengths of the parents. So if you get waves together in powers of 2, after a while when the waves start adding and multiplying, the kids start fighting, and you got arguments in the family. Okay? Whereas if you get waves converging at 0.6180339 and 1.0 and 1.618 and 2.618, when the waves add and multiply, guess what? All the kids get along. Okay? And you get nesting. It's highly romantic. Okay? You get the flavor. So the point is, here is self-awareness converging, because this wave can add and multiply with that wave and make a kid, which can agree with that wave, which can agree with that wave. And guess what? All the waves in the universe can agree on one point if they get together that way. Okay? That's a nest of pressures. Okay? And guess what? Then whoever is at the center of that fractal gets to steer all of those donuts at once. Okay? That's power. Okay? Now, that algorithm of that centering principle is the electrical geometry of the donuts that get taught to converge at the sinoatrial node of the heart at the moment of love. Okay? It creates a fractal, which is attractive, which sucks in and creates that presence. So now let's look at what's happening in DNA, okay? We might be seeing stars. What we're doing is we said, oh, we noticed that the view of DNA was a ratcheting dodeca. Now remember, what we did is we had really 7 spins, the tetra, but we had the cube we think of it as 3 dimensions because it could spin on 3 axes at once. And then we nest that in the dodeca and it can spin on the 4th axis, so it's in the next dimension. And then if we take that green dodeca and we ratchet it down like this and blink 10 times per full turn, okay, you have exactly DNA, okay? So it's literally the 5th axis of spin or dimension. So this is what they meant when they said there's more threads in the DNA. They just meant that there was a braid on the braid of the braid of the braid, and the longest wave in that braiding is another thread in DNA, because it literally wasn't there before somebody learned how to braid. And the braiding of the DNA is done by the EKG at the moment of love. We published that. So here's this sort of top-down view. Okay, and you see pent within pent. It's a little dark there. If you can see it here, it's kind of nice too. Okay. And again, I apologize, our multimedia, you'd think with us being such multimedia whiz, but my LTV focus box did only black and white today. So we're going to ratchet that then from the side, and then, okay, there's 10 dodecahedron there, and then we'll see a side view where we see the ratchet, where we see the braid, where you see the 2 helix, which is right there. Okay, see that helix there? Okay, the transition is showing up here, but I had a fade on. Oh dear. Well, you can still see it on here. See that helix and that helix? Okay, it's a double helix. You can see on this screen it's better actually. The fade wipe transitions don't go through the LTV focus either. If you take that, which is literally the cube in the 4th dimension, is a dodeca. The dodeca in the 5th dimension is the helix. Now, if you take that helix and you braid that like it was a thread, and then you do a braid on the braid, you then are in the 7th dimension. You have the 7th axis of spin superposed. And what we essentially published at ISSEM, I had suggested to Glenn Ryan there, that we measure the braid tightness of DNA in the presence of EKG coherence, and sure enough, the wrapping factor, DNA goes like in the presence of coherence in the EKG. So it's like the phonon waves from the heartbeat at the moment of love cascade down through the cell membrane and teach the DNA how to braid like you learned how to braid your little sister's ponytail. Okay? Here's the 2. You take the hair and you divide it in half, and you could take one hand over and the other hand under, and the other hand over and the other hand under, and the other hand over and the other hand under, okay? And then when you were done braiding that hair, if you had put a pen in your hand instead of hair, what you would have drawn was the frequency signature of the DNA, of the EKG at the moment of love, and the spin path we just did, okay? So literally learning that braiding algorithm is teaching the photon wavefronts in the DNA how to implode. Okay? So now supposing we looked at the light wave cascading down the wormhole of the DNA. If the braid is right, then when it reaches the next long wave in the short, it gets a kick in the pants, a linear accelerator, and that wave can go faster. Because not only do the wavelengths add and multiply, we just saw that, but also the wave velocities add and multiply. What that adds up to mean is this is biology's only natural doorway through the speed of light, which we call making a soul. Okay? That literally this process of getting the DNA braided right allows those wave fronts to implode cascade, not just as to length, but as to velocity. And so those velocity moments are able to be squeezed as if squirted. Okay? And that creates a donut inside a donut, which pressurizes the waves and gives them a periscope, a wormhole, with which to move faster than the speed of light. And when you get a wavefront to move faster than the speed of light, and I believe it's only possible in log functions of phi, then what you specifically have leverage on is time. Okay? It's the basis of the paper we just published on the web is called Can Intent Steer Waves? Okay? Basically, if you look at the shape of the pineal gland and the shape of pining in general and the shape of the pine cone, okay, what you're seeing is that 60-degree light cone from the side, that braiding, okay? And what that is doing is teaching us what pining can do. Okay, as in charge the battery of yearning. Okay, it's teaching us how to squirt those waves through the speed of light and thus get leverage on time, the future. And that's how intent steers waves into the future. Okay, it creates that leverage. Okay, and the reason we call that soul is because it creates the ultimate modem. Okay? In the sense it's the ultimate connectivity device. I mean, it's literally the best way to modulate, demodulate, right? Okay, modem, right? Because here is waves converging, and what they have to do is say, gee, I want to do this test to see which of these spins was shareable, which is exactly what you do when you die. Okay? What you do is you test to see which of the memories were useful to a larger axis of symmetry. Okay? Like, have you harvested any memory for the galactic core today at the cappuccino bar? Right? It's like just before you die and you make this decision of which memories are worth carrying with you and which would be more convenient to dump out of the filing cabinet. The operation is a symmetry operation, which is to say test for sharing. Okay? Now what this convergence of pressures does is it permits the waves to get together and do the test for sharing. Okay? And so what that does is it gives us the opportunity to test to see if our intention is the same as the intention of a longer wave. And therefore, that longer wave will then give us permission to steer. Now that becomes very, very practical information about inserting your emotional magnetism, not just into song lines and tectonics, but into star systems. And this is where we get into the stories of the Ophanim. Does anybody know what Ophanim means?
Aren't they like the sylphs or I'm looking for their word. It's the little angels, right? No. They're angels, basically, right? But they're specific.
Well, there was the seraphim, and there was the cherubim, and there was the Ophanim. Right, cherub. Yes. Okay. Now, so this is like the sociology of families of angels. Now, literally, if you did ask the question, how many angels, I mean angles, could fit on the head of a pin, okay, with this model, you would have an answer. Okay? That is to say, if they nested their spins in the ratio of love, then and only then an infinite number of angles could fit wavefront on the head of a pin. Okay? So you would have an answer about angles, angels, and arc angles, too. Okay? Right. And the reason you'd have an answer is because you would be able to visualize inside yourself the shape of how waves could converge, and thus have the privilege of steering them. Now, this is important because it gets to the kind of family history of our little DNA gene pool here in terms of what the parents of the family had in mind when they conceived the kids. And by this I mean, you see, the indigenous people called them the bird tribes. Okay? The Aboriginals called them lords of time or keepers of time. Okay? The Christians called them Ophanim. Okay? The Pleiadians call them lords of time, keepers of time. Okay? But basically what we have here is the magnetic symmetry of bodies, by virtue of being recursive in time, are able to inhabit time. Okay? And we need to understand that. Okay? Basically, here is the Earth going around the sun. Now, if somebody got to dance with waves that could move faster than light, then they could be there before the Earth got there next time for all the little wave convergences, right? So being able to squirt something that has recursion through the wormholes of spin, you could then move in and out of time by moving in and out at the speed of light, correct? You'd have to have the right implosion geometry to do that. For the Greys, that was called abducting DNA to make soul. Okay? But for us, it's a matter of, if we're the Aku turning inside out, it's a matter of learning the compassion that braids the DNA to make a soul. Okay? Now, what that enables the children of the gene pool to do was break out of this little auric egg bubble that's now dimpling, which is our time quarantine. Okay? And that is why those who can move in and out are called lords or keepers of time. And what they do to time is something that we do need to understand. This was the Templar agenda about repairing the rift in the time continuum, as, for example, damaged by the Phi Summum German time travel experiments and the Montauk Philadelphia experiments and the Incunabula. Okay, this tears in the fabric of time can be repaired. And there are reasons why it needs to be repaired. And it's very understandable. When Carol Ann wrote the book, The Spiral Calendar, and determined that the periodicities in time were moving by the square root of phi, which was the frequency signature when we got the most harmonics in the EKG at the moment of love, okay, he was proving that recursion in time was what animated our spin system. Okay, animus, okay? Somebody's doing a fun computer animation. And basically the nature of the fun is that, let me give you some examples. You notice that when that little Georgie Doxy worm of a phi wave within a phi wave looked alive when it was done, it felt alive, okay? Imagine if the orbital time of the spin of Mercury nested into the spin of Venus, nested into the spin of Earth, were 1.618, okay? Well, guess what? It's true. Okay? Imagine if you did a frequency signature of the hydrogen atom, lined up the spectral emission lines, and it was a log function of phi. Would that tell you something about the cookbook for braiding matter out of light? Well, guess what? It's true. Okay? Now, imagine if the periodicities of the solar flare geometry, as in the Mayan calendric, was a log function of phi iterating the codons of DNA. Guess what? It's true. Somebody's doing a little embedding experiment here, right? Somebody is solving a compression algorithm in order to make shareability possible. Like, the data is so big. Well, let's see if we compress it, then we can pass it out for free. But, oh, guess what? What's the best way to compress data? Make it self-embedding. If you arrange it fractally, it becomes infinitely compressible. And that solves the distribution problem. That's what love is. Okay? Because it takes 0 wattage to hand out your hard disk if you've compressed the data fractally. Okay? So if you get the data into the symmetry of pure self-embeddedness, pure recursion, the perfect 3D fractal. Fern tree branch, fern tree leaf, tip of fern tree leaf, you zoom in forever, you always see the same thing, right? That's a 3-dimensional fractal. Well, this fractal is 3-dimensional from every angle of approach. I guess we need a couple more animations here. Really? Okay, so here what we did is we took that spiral we were playing with before when we breathed? Okay, all we did here was revolve the spiral. Now, in the nature of this cup is, you never know whether you're inside or outside. And you can zoom in forever from any angle approaching center, and you always see the same thing. And you can pour an infinite amount of spin into this cup, this Grail cup, and it will never fill. Okay? This is what light sees on its way down into DNA. Okay? And in the side view of this cup, when you do the spin, go ahead. You can actually see a heart within a heart within a heart within a heart, infinitely. Okay? It's that perfect zoom. You've seen it from the videos, I'm sure. Okay? So here, what have the Ophanim accomplished by creating a pattern in time that's embeddable like this? Okay? They've created recursion, and incursion is what allows pressure or breath to live inside itself infinitely. So it's what allows you to arrange donuts so they can nest one inside each other and never fight. Okay? So the spin patterns in time, when they become recursive, just like the little donuts we saw pictures of. Bigger donut, but all the donuts converge at one point and don't fight because of that LO phi. Okay? When the spin patterns in time are like that, then time is inhabitable. Okay? And in fact, that would be the way you squirt your magnetic body through black holes to inhabit galaxies, threading them through time. Okay? And that would be called Ophanim, which means whirling ones. Okay? O-phi and M. Okay? Right? So, the Ophanim conceived a plan. Their plan was they would take 1,254 star systems and they would project them on the land in their image and likeness. Okay? And what that would do would create a cat's cradle of implosive capacitance, which we would later call gravity, okay, which would then make an image of a body anthropomorphically of the shape of the charged systems of star systems, 12-faced zodiac, Isis unveiled, pull yourself together, Osiris. 12-faced is what, dodeca, okay? So you have this projection animas of a charge of star systems, and what that is, if you can impress that embedded braiding algorithm on the DNA, what you could create would be a new experiment in self-awareness that would have the potential to have emotions that would bend star systems. Okay? In other words, the Ophanim said that they would let us out of our time bubble when they would observe that we could take responsibility for galactically resonant emotions. Okay? In other words, yes, the Aboriginals, you were right. If you squirt the emotional magnetism of ritual down the magnetic grid, and you could pick it up on the other side of the continent like it was a phone line, but you'd call it a song line, okay? That insertion of recursion into the magnetic worms by self-awareness, okay, was creating the glue. So that's how you held tectonics together. That's why it was taboo to panic in China during an earthquake, okay? But now we can understand more that that insertion of magnetic recursion among the donuts, among the wormholes, by squirting love, by squirting the ability to feel outside in as if it were inside out, is the glue which holds galaxies together. And in fact, the reason why the pyramids point to Orion is because Orion is pregnant. And you can't birth sustainable star systems without the insertion of collective bardo. Okay? Because the collective emotion of gene pools inhabiting birthing star systems is what makes the symmetry of their gravity bodies recursive enough to be sustainable. In other words, if you want to birth a star system, you need self-awareness to be born in there. And that's where you have little baby Ophanim. Okay? Well, meantime, there was a little squabble in the family. And the squabble in the family was, see, this was a galaxy a long way from downtown. And you needed to insert something here in order to insert self-awareness, which was rather, shall we say, had some chutzpah. Excuse me. And that's where the Draco came in, okay? The Ophanim sent the portion of the bloodline that had a lot of chutzpah first, okay? And what they did is they colonized a high percentage of the inhabitable star systems around Orion, if we're to believe the information, and basically got the place going towards self-organization. Then later you introduce the more fragile, delicate sort of Aku, half of the Ophanim family. And the Aku half of the Ophanim family are very good at magic and Wicca and bending magnetism with glands, but they're not so good at balancing checkbooks. Okay? And actually, that's what the sort of controversy between Akhenaten, Tutankhamun versus the Amun-Ra family, okay? It's the same squabble down through history. It was those who were bending magnetism from the outside in versus those from the inside out. And this became Michaelic, Lucifer, and one got bad press, and we're not sure who. You can take a guess, right? Basically, so there was a squabble among the angels. Now, just to sort of focus this into a little piece of a mythology here, then, if you take the descendants of the sort of Dracu, which became the Orion Queen Sati-sponsored early antediluvian nuclear mess that sent the diaspora of humanoids back to Pleiades and Sirius. I don't know if you sort of played with this story. And then it's sort of, you had some of this in Anana Returns and God King Akhenaten and da-da-da. And then, so you have the Orion Queen, which has the hive mentality, the serpent force. Today we see the sort of red-headed Wicca, a reptilian. It is the Magdalene blood, okay? Well, Magdalene was the name for the journal on fractality, was the amygdala, which is the name for the nut shape in the brain, which if squeezed by the phonons of coherent EKG, what happens if you squeeze a perfect fractal? Okay, the nut, okay, the amygdala. What happens is the nature of the pressure in the squeeze by virtue of shape, and that's another name for the universe, guys, by virtue of shape, right? If you squeeze the nut with the phonons of coherent EKG focused by the ventricle horns of the brain, okay, the phonon geometry creating a sonic coherent, ecstatic process, plumbing of ecstasy, da-da-da. The squeeze, what it does, because of the nut shape, is allows that pressure to go in. You see, the pressure could not go in if it didn't look like your child's Valentine. But if you squeeze the child's Valentine, then all the pressures can go inside, 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 inside out. Okay, so what drips from the top of the back of the tongue from the amygdala, which is the name for the journal on fractality, Magdala, is the sweet dripping juice. Sweetness is a measure only of braidedness. Right? So the Magdalene blood becomes the sort of the Orion queen, and then you have the other half, which is the Syrian high prince, Ea, Easu, Jesu, Jesus. Okay, there's a dynastic union of the bloodlines. Okay, because really depends on whether you believe Abraham played with radioactivity, impregnated Sarah, the lady of Ra. Okay, and Abraham is really, it depends whether you believe he was really from the Anunnaki, but he was snuck in there from the Syrians, it depends who you believe. But anyway, so Abraham impregnates Sarah, he was E.T., and the only kids were Joseph and Benjamin of the coat of many colors, braidedness in the coat, raiment, etc., etc. And Jesus and Joseph and Benjamin become the parents of Jesus and Magda, and you have this recombinant bloodline thing happening, right? And then the children of Jesus and Magda become Holy Blood, Holy Grail, Merovingian, the wine and the blood of the mother, Prioridicion, the priory of the branch, SCION means branching algorithm, phylotactic, da-da-da. You get the flavor. So you have this whole Holy Blood, Holy Grail story about spin density in the blood, which is this. Remember, when the blood gets braided right, this is what light sees on its way in. Okay? Which is a cup within a cup. Sangreal, song in the blood. And then when the blood is that braided, what happens is, supposing you were a wave the size of a tectonic shelf, okay? And you wanted to get phase locked to DNA, how would you do it? Right? Piezoelectricity, which is really a slinky's working, is a braid on the braid of the braid in the braid. If the longest wave in the braid of DNA is the scale of continents, what do you get? Okay? You get the ability emotionally to fabricate ecosystems. Now we've measured the entraining of the EKG on a tree 200 feet away capacitively, the phase lock. Okay? And the harmonic series becomes a log function of the Schumann resonance, basically. So the idea here of the Aku instruction to teach us to turn inside out it entered the arena of its appropriate test with the kind of Dracu story, which became a symbol of Draconian, and then it becomes the story of Hail Bop. And the reason I asked earlier about Busty about whether he had looked at morning sky on the predictions of the orbit of Hale Bopp in the crop circle geometries was well, it appears that the very orbital geometry has so much profundity in it that it's obviously intentional and communicative. And some of the folks, if you believe the Andromedan stories, believe that Enlil, Enlil and Enki were the sons of Ea and Anu, and you have the whole story there. So what appears to be the social presence arriving is the remnant of the reptilian brain, which is the organ, which is the mechanism of Kundalini. I mean, it's the waveguide pump. It's the plumber of Kundalini. Okay, the reptilian brain, as it was part of the genetic experiment of seeding our gene pool, re-arrives for a little bit of kick in the tail, right? And what that is, it's more than symbolic of the feeling of Kundalini when it first strikes the base of the spine. Okay? What is the feeling of Kundalini when it first strikes the base of the spine? It's like a lover was sticking a finger up somewhere and you were trying to decide if you liked it or not. No, it's true. It's very true. And your decision of whether or not you like it has a lot to do with whether or not you invite the entry of lightning up your spine. Okay? And it is said it makes conventional orgasm boring if done properly. Right? Well, here is sort of a planetary onset of a memory of the juices of the reptilian brain arriving with the Anunnaki, who have been screwing our ladies for every 3,600 years, depends who you believe, right? Crossing up the bloodlines, right? Basically, they created genetic droids for the purpose of harvesting gold because the Orion queens paid them because they ate gold. Okay? This was just a cover story on Sitchin. Like you use gold to repair atmospheres? Well, that's true, but that's just the surface, okay? Because, see, what it is if you make a magnetic fractal around a planet, where's the blue doohickey? If you arrange the magnetic lines on a planet to intersect in a way that the geometry is fractal dodeca implosive, then what you do is you stabilize the atmosphere. Because what magnetic recursion does is creates the attractor that holds atmosphere to planets. That's what Cydonia and Giza were for, was to adjust the spin rates of the nutation to phase-lock zodiacal spin to complete the spin fractal so the planets could be fed by zodiacal spin, and that concrescent implosive nesting of spins tuned by the Giza-Cydonia tetrahedral spin leverage point manipulation actually created the ability to stabilize atmosphere on planets. So essentially what it is it's like the planet. I have this tool we teach this with. It's a three-dimensional gyroscope, and it spins this way and this way and this way all at once. And if you nutate the gyroscope like this properly, you can catch the spin and you can cause the gyroscope to speed up. Okay? Well, that's the relationship of zodiacal spin to planetary spin. Okay? And in fact, if you take the plane of the zodiac, teacup saucer, T-saucer, and then you take the plane of, let's say, the plane of the galaxy is a teacup saucer. The plane of the solar system is another teacup saucer, and the plane of the Earth is another teacup saucer. Where those three teacup saucers cross, you get two lines. Okay? When those two lines go to 90 degrees, you have the possibility for time implosion. Okay, because that then allows that cube to nest in the dodeca, basically. And that's called the erection of the Holy Cross. It sounds sexual, but actually it has to do with what's called the photon cloud and the nexus and the still point and the 0 point and the time implosion and the solar flare peak predicted by the Ren, the cross at Ren, Iendes and all that stuff. It all has to do with understanding zodiacal geometries and spin implosions and what gets tested for shareability at that doorway. So anyway, the various humanoid elements, Pleiadian, Sirian, and maybe the Tau Ceti, had to regroup back where their gene pool was born, which was Earth, in a Bethlehem experiment, because that's where you get in line to see if your gene pool can make it through the time wormhole where the wormhole opens up. And in case you haven't seen Deep Space Nine, that's here. You make big bucks by being located near the wormhole if you can handle it. Right? So what happens is, basically, this transport mechanism of the arrival of the site of maximum implosion is a place where you regroup. The humanoids come back, and they said, like Montauk was trivial, really what we need to do is see if we can get our gene pools out of our time bubbles and become lords of time, and you get in line where the wormhole is about to implode. So they're arriving here in quantity. Okay? And what we need to understand is where our leverage exists in this little experiment in implosion, or Merc Ab-A, because it's not just mark of pressure, it also means a vehicle, Abba, for Merc. And Merc was one of the early ET colonizers, if you believe Secret Places of the Lion. It has to do with Ezekiel's wheels and all that stuff. So to understand the principle, we need to finish the story about gold, because it's kind of fun. It's almost political. See, what it is gold is, if you looked, well, first you need to understand a little bit about the atomic table. This is what your chemistry teacher did not teach you, okay? The SPDF subshells is how you name the layering of the electron shells. And if you nest them one inside the other, you get the whole atomic table, right? Now the SPDF subshells is 2 electrons, 4 electrons, 2, 6, 10, and 14 electrons is SPDF subshell. Well, if you take donuts, take 1 donut, you got 2 vortex. You take 2, you got nothing. Take 3, you got a tetracube, which is 6 vortex, okay? You take 5, you got dodeca. You take 7, you got icasa. 1, 3, 5, 7 donuts times 2 vortex each is 2, 6, 10, 14 electrons, okay? And what you just made was donut, tetracube, dodeca, icasa. Icasa has 7 axes. It's 5 real and 2 pseudo-rotations. Armand Weiler, da-da-da. Anyway, so you cook up the atomic table by learning how to nest donuts into this symmetry, right? So cool. Now what is gold? Gold is when you get the electron shell vortex completing their nests, so everybody's happy in the nest. And what does the outer valence electron shells look like? DF, 10, 14, dodeca, icasa. Okay, the outside of gold, seen clairvoyantly. Perfect fractal. In fact, it's the best valent fractal we got. In fact, it's so because it's noble. It's complete in itself. All the symmetry is done. Okay, so it's an instruction in creating fractals at the electron and atomic levels. So if you pop it monoatomic, make it soluble in water blood, you create implosion in the blood. That's what the Dracos did when they ate it. Okay? It just didn't get born with David Hudson, okay? Okay, this was a technology, and a technology for immortality. Minor little detail, if you stop dying, you forget how to. Seems funny at first, but see, that's the wormhole insertion moment there. So then if you get to a time implosion, guess what? The whole gene pool just slams up against the brick wall and it's over. This is the Draco story, unless they can't make a soul. Any questions?
Again?
Lonnie had a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was fascinating. It was complex to follow, but I think I got it.
Consume the perspective.
My understanding, we are now moving from 2-strand DNA to 12-strand DNA. And would you address that?
Yeah, my feeling is that it's quite crude to think of somebody getting in there with a sewing machine and inserting some new strands. It could never happen in one contiguous process. What can happen, however, is you can take a 2-strand DNA, braid it in dodeca, and you can take that strand, visualize it as a thread, and you take that thread and you braid it into a rope. Then you look at the length of the waves in the rope as composed to the short wave in the long wave, which is the ratio of carrier wave to envelope. Carrier wave, here's a carrier wave, here's the envelope. Okay? Now you have a carrier wave to envelope ratio. Now if that's phi, that means the energy of the carrier wave can spin into the envelope and vice versa. And then you braid that braid on the braid and you make a fat rope. Guess what the ratio of the carrier wave to the envelope is? And then you braid that braid onto a fatter rope yet. When you're done, you would have 12 strands. Okay?
What we had before we got met?
Well, you see, the Andromedan said we came from the 11th dimension and we elected to come down here so we could get focused, right? Right? Which is to say more leverage on spin, right?
Drumlo says we're going to get more, moving from, problems were getting more chromosomes?
If you think of what chromosome means, okay, it refers to the summation of chromo, which doesn't just mean color or time, but it means tilt.
Okay.
Summation of the potential tilts possible, right? Because what color is the cone would never be used in antenna theory for anything except calibrating the tilt of the approaching donut, okay? You would never use a conic antenna, the cone of the eye, unless you wanted to measure the phase angle of the approaching field effect. So what the cone of the eye does is measures the tilt of the approaching donut and calls that color. If the converging side of the photon approaches, we call it red. If the diverging side approaches, we call it blue, sacre bleu. The green approaches, it's perfectly balanced. Okay? The blue is feminine, the red is masculine. The blue is wet making, the red's hard making. Hebrew for red was Adom, which meant hard making, to dam the flow. Adamic race, the red race. So you see the idea that symmetry was what color is. So chromosome would refer to the ability to nest the tilts, the chromos. So, and that's what the braiding does. So we have been right to say, yes, we're going to get more strands, but if you just looked at it, you would not see the strand of that very long wave until the braiding was done. So you actually do get more strands. Right. Got to face it.
I didn't know what you said.
It's out of phase.
That's right.
It's there, but the vibration will be just right.
Right. Right. And if you think what happens at the moment of compassion is you're looking at someone whom you're not sure you like, okay, and you're trying to decide if you want to choose to feel the magnetism that's in them as if it were in you. Okay? And that moment at which you choose that feeling says to the inner donut, choose the nesting algorithm to permit turning inside out, the 5-7, the dodecahedron, da-da-da. And that turning inside out, which whether you call it labyrinth, top-down view of a donut, creates a electrical, capacitive, and phonon wave, which are all powers of phi, which create a braiding algorithm, which is what teaches DNA how to do it. So that's why for the Draco, the experience of compassion in a mother, the experience of compassion in a mother is the first experience of choosing to turn inside out. It's like if you were always outside in, you develop a completely different mentality than if you're inside out. Okay? It's a completely different view of the world. Okay? And what we're seeing from the sort of arrival of the ETs is that our technology is like trivial. It's child's play. It's like, compared to the evolved ecosystems of the galaxy, we are like kindergartners, excuse me very much. Might as well put away your ray guns, they ain't good enough. Right? But our ability to change emotions on a dime, okay, the Andromedan story of like the police officer covered with anger shoots the running criminal, and then seconds later he's running over with great compassion trying to save the criminal's life. Okay? These Andromedans are over there scratching their heads saying, wow, glandularly, do you know what that means? Okay, that means you could change the magnetism of spin, okay, that admittedly we're like a bull in a china shop right now as a species because we're getting close to the glandular magnetism it takes to mess up galaxies, okay? So they're like worried about us big time. But on the other hand, if the experiment goes right, we could get some of the best galaxy-bending, self-aware angelic logoi being born here that's happened in like, you know, galactic eons. It's fun. We have a project that's underway. It's called Heartbeat Earth, Heartbeat 2000, and published on the webpage. Basically, when we found out that the EKG brain breath phase entrainment was about 0.12 hertz, and that the phase entrainment to the tree could then lock in the Schumann harmonics, which we believe is a harmonic series, and that the Schumann harmonic is not so much changing frequency as it's changing the number of frequencies in the cascade, which is the Schumann envelope, and that when that becomes fractal, the Earth becomes self-aware, and we believe that's teachable. Okay? And one of the experiments we've proposed to make it teachable is that we're building a prototype PC parallel port preamp interface in Hungary, which allows plugging in 4 channels, 2 brain, 1 heart, and 1 of your favorite backyard tree. And you look at the frequency signature of all 4 real time as a rolling landscape waterfall plot of changing harmonic content over time, and teaches the phase lock, heart, brain, tree. And then dumping the FFT over the internet, you could choose your lover on the other side of the planet, test to see if you could phase lock, and then 6 million people at once by the year 2000, by focusing on specific bioregions, could watch the magnetism of that bioregion blossom like a flower on the surface of the planet, okay? Because you'd have spectral distribution of planetary harmonic grid nodes from all the collection points of people plugging in their little PC to the tree in their backyard, okay? And so you could see real time as the planet blossomed like a flower of self-awareness as the global heartbeat phase locked, okay? It's called the Heartbeat 2000 project.
Can you tell them a little bit about what you did with the kids? You actually did this?
The group in Munich, Lisbeth Brund, was teaching precocious young people to change the germination rates of seeds with their love, and had the pots in the window and the experiments underway. And the children took it very seriously. And they really focused on this work, and they realized that they were affecting. Then they would walk around and they would focus on trees. They really realized that something was happening to those seeds when they sent them love. So anyway, she's involved in the spectrum analysis of the EKG work, and hopefully one stop on the trip to Germany. And yeah. So we're talking about, with David, about this dream of the traveling magical mystery tour for kids with Jonathan's truckload of toys and songs and dance and a little multimedia show and like the heartbeat of the planet. Thank you very much. So the subject of this tape is basically the survival of our gene pool and an understanding of the time implosion, the story about ETs, angels, and the nature of the sort of galactic spiritual history of the Earth. And this is a summary and assemblage of information from many sources. Included among those sources are the Zecharia Sitchin material, Genesis Revisited et al., and the Andromedan material from Alex Collier and others, the Pleiadian material from Barbara Marciniak and others and friends, the Inanna Returns material, which is the story of this sort of, well, I guess you'd say the Elohim, or if you understand the sort of dragons of Eden, reptilian idea of the origins of the Anunnaki. Included here will be information as published on the web from the sort of effect of the ET problem on the Earth currently, as described by Branton and Collier and Cooper and others. So this is kind of a gathering of materials, and then we add to that recent information we have learned about the way in which DNA is affected by emotion and intention. Because we have been advised by the Andromedans and others that the key is in the understanding of intention, that we really get to the root of why we are so important to kind of the galactic community. So we assemble all these pieces, and although there's much talk about disinformation, in fact, if we look carefully at the literature about ETs, even the sort of the Greys communion literature and the information about the Dracos, if you look at all that literature taken together, also Max, the Syrians, the Hawaii group, lots of people. Oh, and I forgot to mention Robert Moinsky and the Terror Papers in his view of the Syrian origins from the Hopi and indigenous Indian legends of the ET Star Elder traditions. So anyway, we have lots of neat little braids here. But what's important is to get a sense of, among all of that, why would it be so important that the Andromedan Council, the Ophanim Angels, the entire galactic community has staked a great deal of resource and investment, in a sense, on the survival of our gene pool, which is in fact threatened. And maybe we could say appropriately challenged, or even we could say usefully challenged to transform. So we need to understand deeply and grok for ourselves powerfully so that we can deal with the fact that the extraterrestrial and galactic context of Earth is now going to come into our awareness, and that the political and social and spiritual implications
require that we personally take action that has the effect of being the survival of the memories of our bloodline, of our families. I mean, in a small scale, it is like, oh, what do we do about abduction? And what do we do when all of these entities come into our aura? And there are physics to answer those questions. There is physics. More than that, it is making a conscious decision to harvest some shareable memory that is sweet, or to say, braided for the galactic core. So all of these stories taken together summarize or comprise a bit of a intuition then about how we can take practical action now. And I keep thinking of other important sources to mention for this conversation. We have the story of Thoth Tahuti, who was the original builder of the pyramid, who in some ways is perhaps, we say, the kind of ambassador for Earth, who has described the kind of quarantine around the Earth during the time of our propagation of fear. So the Thoth Papers, as narrated by William Buehler and the Templar group, and also as narrated by Vincent Bridges, as published on our webpage in the article Brief Introduction to a Spiritual History of the Galaxy by Thoth, in which he describes an immense timeline. Our webpage address, incidentally, in which many of the related articles appear, is www.estrie.com/MacPhee, MACPHI. So, there's a way you can pursue further details and pictures of these stories right on the web. Now, interestingly, it might be that the kind of story that William Buehler and his group, working on an extension of what the Templars were up to about finishing the patterns on the landscape of the Gothic cathedrals as a repair of the time corridors, is maybe an opening little sort of story or fabric or fairy tale to launch us into our history of the galaxy. Basically, what the Thoth narrations through William Buehler and the Templars have described is that, indeed, as described in many of the books about the Gothic cathedrals, if you stand back and look at the pictures of the Gothic cathedrals as they're laid out on the continent of Europe, you see a great picture of the zodiac. You see literally an arrangement as if stars had been projected on film, and that film was the Earth grid, or the magnetic array, or the picture of the Gothic cathedrals on the Earth. So somebody was making a fractal, that is to say, in the image and likeness of, or an embeddedness of, the zodiac on the land for a particular purpose. And actually, we were having this neat conversation yesterday, and Joy here asked the question. She says, well, people need a real practical answer to the question, how do they understand what a fractal is? Because it's central to what we're going to develop here about how pictures on the land and how emotion is able to resonate and steer things which are very large, like star systems. So we need to know how in morphic resonance the small touches the large in the sense of as above, so below, or I am that I am, or I am created in the image and likeness of. The principle of fractality is the kind of physics behind the morphic resonance which allows emotion not just to fabricate ecosystems by bending magnetism, but also fabricate star systems. So the principle of fractality is the key to that. And I guess the way we told the story yesterday was the kind of fern tree story, which is fun. It's like, suppose there's a 4-year-old that said, I want to know what a fractal is. You couldn't answer, well, a Mandelbrot set, or here's an equation. No, you got to tell a 4-year-old something you can visualize. So the way we kind of tell a story is a fern tree is a mathematical representation of what is a fractal. And if you stood back and look at a fern tree, you would see kind of this shape, getting a little narrower at the top. Actually, it's sort of like this shape, which we're going to talk about. It's the shape of what is a fern tree. Now, if you zoom in further on that fern tree, and you look instead at the whole fern tree, if you look at one branch, what you see again is the same shape. And then you zoom in further and you look at one leaf, what you see again is the same shape. And then you zoom in further and look at a tip of the leaf, what you see again is the same shape. And then you zoom in further and look at one tip on the tip of the tip on the tip of the tip on the tip of the leaf, of the branch, of the fern tree, what you see again is the same shape. Now what that infinite ability to zoom in and always see the same thing is called is self-reference, self-embeddedness, fractality, self-awareness, or being self-contained. And all of those refer to a geometry, a shape, where the little can be perfectly embedded in the big, and therefore the shape or waveform, or because waveforms have frequency signatures, where the ringing of the wave envelope, that is the little, can unpack, cascade, and affect directly the big. And that resonance from the shape of the small resonating in phase entraining and bending the shape of the large is called morphic resonance. And what it means in the sort of Rupert Sheldrake sense is that a pure shape can have an effect sort of without regard to the limitations of time and space, because shape alone carries that resonance between structures. And fractality is the optimization of that process. And is self-embeddedness. Now, we're going to try to understand that in terms of what love does to DNA to create implosion. And the way we're going to look at that is, here's that same shape again, okay? It's like this, sort of the pine cone shape. Now, let's think of what shape you saw in the opening animation, which is on this tape, where the two golden mean spirals would look like a child's valentine, zoomed inward infinitely, and where they crossed in the center was, guess what? The same almond pine cone shape, okay? And we see that that is the shape of the pineal gland and the pine cone. Now, what does the word pining mean? It refers to yearning, or in a sense, will. Now, in a sense, what that is the geometry of intent itself. Now, why do we call it intent if it is in fact not putting the waves into a tent shape, literally, a tent shape, of which the top-down view is 10 spirals of the golden mean, as in the first animation on this tape. So intent and intend and to intend is to braid the waveforms to this particular shape, which creates a very particular physics. That physics is implosion. The nature of implosion is that if you braid the waves into the shape shown in the first animation on this tape, what you do is you allow you allow the waves to add and multiply as they converge or heterodyne or beat node towards center. And the way to visualize that is very simple. If you take the top-down view of DNA, which is, remember when Betsy Ross drew the star? She went, troop, bottom left, top center, over, troop, troop. Okay, you actually draw a pentagram. Okay, there, that's right. Okay, I continuously moved in a clockwise from my perspective direction, and I drew a pentagram. Okay, like this. Oops. Bottom left, top center, bottom right, top left, top right, back to bottom left. Okay, that is a pentagram, and I continuously moved in a clockwise direction, and the waves that converged and interfered in that ratio, because there'd be a pentagram inside a pentagram infinitely, the waves could add and multiply because the waves could meet in golden mean ratio, which is what pentacles do, and the golden mean ratio is the only ratio that allows adding and multiplying. And what is adding and multiplying but heterodyning? And that is a permissive way for waves to interfere and not fight. It's just a way for waves to have kids and have no arguments. But the thing is, as the wavelengths add and multiply infinitely towards center, remember where you saw it become infinitely spin dense? The waves also add and multiply not just wavelengths, but wave velocities. So what happens is, as the wave velocities add and multiply along with the wavelengths, what happens is this becomes the only biologically natural doorway through the speed of light. That is, this is the way in which superluminal wave wormholes are created in DNA, for which those nested pentacles are a top-down view. Because DNA, as you'll recall from other computer animations, is just this dodecahedron ratcheting. I just go blink, 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 and I do that 10 times, and I have mapped one complete ratchet of the spiral helix of DNA. So DNA takes the 3-spin cube, nests in the 4-spin dodeca, braids in the 5-spin ratchet helix of the dodeca, and then braid the braid and braid the braid on the braid until you have 7 coherent strands. And that's what was meant by saying that we needed 12 strands in our DNA,
it meant we needed to complete the braiding, which is what love accomplishes. So now you have the sense that here is the only way in which waveforms can implode through the speed of light and not lose their spin, inertia, or pattern. This implosion, creating a wormhole through the speed of light, is what we call soul, because it creates connectedness, which is what fractality does. Fractality creates shareability in pure principle as waveform. An example of that is, if you have some data and you want to share it around the planet, the first thing you've got to do to find a way to compress it. The better you can compress it, the easier it is to send it around the planet. If you could compress it infinitely, then you could give it to everybody on the planet for free and it would take no energy to get it there. Well, the only way to compress data infinitely is pure fractality. Fractal data is infinitely compressible, and that makes it infinitely shareable. And the physics of fractality and recursion is that the golden mean, phi 1.618, optimizes recursion mathematically. So it is the perfect way to create embeddedness. So now we have this idea that here it is, the possibility exists in our very DNA to create this implosive wormhole which allows this connectivity to occur. And now remember, we've been calling this intent, and what does intent do except bend the waves of the future? Now, what is it we mean? What is the physics of pure intent? Here we now have the answer, really, because getting through the speed of light is the same thing as getting through the time barrier. It's very simple to understand. You don't need to be Einstein, although he's helping us. Ein means one and Stein means first day, to know the one, right? Einstein knew that if you understood why black holes created time bending, you would then understand implosion. And that was his final lifetime mystery, was to understand implosion. And now we do. The physics of implosion is the physics of perfect fractal recursion. Okay? So now we can understand why black holes bend time. And you can visualize this by simply thinking of Earth going around in a circle. Here's Earth going in a circle. And remember, rotation is our only definition of time. And rotation is our only definition and creation of the stored inertia we call mass. So if you can move in and out of spin, you can move in and out of both mass and time. So here's the Earth going in a circle. And here are the waves, light waves, making up Earth. They're crossing, and at the nodes, we call that matter, right? And when the waves go to line, we call it energy. And the path from the circle to the line, from mass to energy, is the golden mean spiral. So that's the only way to lift your attention up off the cross of time and space. That is to lift your attention from the wave, from the node, rather, which is incarnation, to the wave, which is energy. To lift your attention, you follow that yellow brick road to Oz, the emerald green crystal, so to speak. Anyway, so here's the Earth going in a circle. The waves are converging. They're at the speed of light. Now, if you could go faster than the speed of light, you could go around and get to the Earth before it got there next time and see what was going to happen. That's why being faster than the speed of light is the same thing as breaking through the time barrier. And that's why all time travel technology was based on a 5-10 decadelta symmetry array. The Phi Sonoma experiments in Germany, etc., and Montauk and Philadelphia and all this. And incunabulum. So now we understand that the wormhole through time called intent is created by a particular geometry, literally, of the physics of pure intention. So here it is, this book, Vortex of Life, which used to be Fields of Form, from the biodynamic and anthroposophic and Steiner tradition, that's showing us that the very shape of the heart muscle itself is based on this pineal, pine cone, pining braidedness that is the essence of yearning. And of course, this was why the ancient myth was that if you ate people's pineal glands, you would live forever, because there's a crude and temporary chemical way to eat pure intention. Okay, which was obviously a kind of perversion of the pure wisdom. Pure wisdom is the only way to create pure intention is to create the fractal in your very heart. And the skill to do that appears to be the skill to love. The choice you make at the moment when someone is seated across from you and you decide to feel their feelings as if they're inside yourself instead of outside yourself is the physics of teaching the magnetism at the center of the heart, which is donut-shaped, to literally turn inside out. And it's literally, this is the 7-color donut in the book When Time Breaks Down by Arthur T. Winfrey, is the map of the electrical waves that approach the sinoatrial node to trigger the heartbeat. So the 7-colored donut, magnetically a voltage gradient toroidal donut wave, converges at the fractal fibers of Purkinje. The branching algorithm is phylotactic. And there, when you choose compassion, what you do is you intentionally choose to steer the magnetic flux lines in such a geometry such that the magnetic flow that's going through the center of this donut can turn inside out and converge the next bigger donut, which is exactly what you saw on the opening animation of this video called Adam's apple. And exactly what happens at the moment of compassion when eventually you steer enough small donuts in turning inside out inside bigger ones, where the ratio of those field effects is perfectly fractal, that the magnetic field that was outside yourself is now literally and physically inside yourself. And that turning inside out is perfected when the heart learns the skill of choosing compassion. And that skill is literally learned. It's literally like learning how to digest spinach. And it is literally a choice to assemble a magnetic fractal. And the evidence of that is that the frequency signature at the moment of love of the EKG, the wavelength of the voltage gradient waves, becomes a power series of phi, the golden mean. And it turns out that we can measure at the moment when a person chooses compassion, we measure in the frequency signature of heart, the EKG, this cascade, which when the most harmonics are present, is necessarily in a power series of phi, because massive coherence never takes place except in the place of massive recursion. And the physics of that is because you can't get the fourth spin on the cube unless you nest the cube in the dodeca, which is, I guess you you see it? Oh, there's a cube in here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a cube in the very center. The tip of my finger touches there. There's a cube in that dodeca. And there's a cube in this dodeca here. Maybe it's easier in this one. My fingers are now touching only at exactly every edge, or the 6 edges of one cube. Okay? The outside shape is a dodeca, but here, tilted at 32 degrees from the floor, is one cube. Okay? Now if I look down at this from above and spun this way and blinked 5 times, like this, I would have exactly 5 cubes nested perfectly in that dodeca. And on each face of that dodeca would be the pentacle of stars within stars, the opening animation of this video. So that edge of that cube became a wavelength. Every edge is a wavelength in a universe made of waves. The only way we could get another spin upon that was to put the 0.618 edge on the surface, on the roof of that cube, and make the pentagram on the roof of the cube. And that process was creating a golden mean ratio to nest spin inside of spin. And then I could spin another spin on that dodeca only if the ratio was again phi. Infinitely. So that means I can never really have more than 3 oscillators ringing phase locked in one surface unless the geometry is phi, golden mean, or recursive. That means we won't get massive cross-hemispheric brainwave coherence or EKG coherence or Earth grid coherence of lots of waves, meaning lots of dimensions of spin, unless the ratio of those wavelengths in that nest was perfectly phi or recursion. Now, we have proposed with Marty Woodkey of the Psychophysiology Lab in Clayton, Georgia, W-U-T-T-K-E, Marty Woodkey. He has found that using this information, you can clinically eliminate addiction and attention deficit by providing biofeedback cues to bring the brainwave harmonics into a ratio of phi, that is becoming recursion. So it isn't just that you have alpha, theta, delta harmonics in your brain, but the ratio of those wavelengths has to be a power of phi. That creates this implosion we call flame. Mind inhabits flame. Flame only exists where waves can agree, and waves can only agree in the presence of this recursion implosion, which we have called both gravity and self-awareness. Because a wave can only feed itself, coming back into itself in the phi spiral. And that's called perfect self-reference, because the wave can only add its spin to itself without killing itself by doing that. That perfection of self-reference can be applied to the clinical use of biofeedback by teaching with biofeedback cues a frequency harmonic in the brain waves, and the EKG based on phi, and that eliminates not just addiction and attention deficit. Remember, attention literally is the size of the coherence of the wave envelope. That's what it is in physics. That's why it creates the physics of focus. And then if we apply that to the Earth, we see that we can teach the Earth to become self-aware using the same biofeedback by spectrum analyzing the harmonic series of what is the Schumann resonance. It isn't just that 8.7 is increasing. No, that's absurd. It is that the number of harmonics in the series, 8, 11, 13, 17, 19, as Professor Phil Callahan has described, that the harmonic series of the Schumann resonance is becoming fractal. And at that point, the collective unconscious becomes the collective conscious, and the Earth becomes self-aware. And the Heartbeat Earth project, as published on our webpage, is a description of entraining 6 million heartbeats and brain waves with ELF coils in 6 million backyards to actually entrain the entire planet to focus on a single bioregion and become self-aware and display the harmonic content of any sector of the Earth as an unpacking magnetic flower of onset coherence recursion, exactly like we would display one region on the surface of the brain for EEG coherence by color code in the Lexicor EEG brain map technology. Anyway, you can read more about that in the Heartbeat Earth project on the web. The point for the little fun discussion here is now we are in a better position to understand why the Andromedan Council said, this is sort of a fun thing, this is Alex Collier's story. The Andromedan Council says, well, we're passing an ordinance that we're going to boot all of the infecting ETs, the Greys and the Dracos and a bunch of other sort of low-end, I won't say low-end spooks, this isn't judgmental, but those whose agendas were not for the self-expression of the Earth. Okay? The Andromedan Council said we're going to boot them out of the Earth by the year 2003. And one of the questions then posed to the Andromedan Council was, were they prepared to stake the survival of their Andromedan civilization on the survival of the Earth in the face of this apparent incoming threat of Draco, reptilian, members on board Hale Bopp, the Greys? Were they prepared to stake their civilization on this threat? And their answer was, A, that they had allies, and yes, they were very determined. So we need to ask ourselves, why are we so important to a galactic civilization when in fact it's totally apparent that our technology here is like, child play, immature, fairly trivial. I mean, like, technologically we are like swatting flies for all these civilizations because we haven't been around nearly as long. We don't even know how to surf gravity waves using cascades of capacitance yet. I mean, gravity, we were just supposed to finish this thought from before. It's important to understand why recursion, self-embeddedness, this implosion, creates both self-awareness, consciousness, and gravity. The way to understand that is that if waves tried to move inward in the cube octa tetra array, what would happen is, as the wavelengths interfered, going in from a cube or a cube octa or a tetra, the waves would destroy their spin, and no spin density or mass would reach center. However, if the electron shell shapes are fractal, like Casa Dodeca, then what happens is the outer electron shell geometry becomes a fractal of the inner nuclear geometry. And what that does is it permits the waves which start imploding in the electron shells to continue that implosion in the nucleus without any destructive harmonic interference. We call that one-way wind cascade of cat's cradle capacitance. We call that gravity. It's a magnetic monopole is Einstein's name for gravity. Okay. Well, how do you get magnetism to go one way? You get it to implode. How do you create implosion? You create a fractal. So the SPDF subshell, which creates the whole atomic table, is really just 1, 3, 5, 7 donut vortex pair. Since there's 2 vortex per donut field effect, you have 2, 6, 10, 14 electrons in SPDF subshells. And what are 1, 3, 5, 7 donuts but torus, tetracube, dodeca, icasa, which is this perfect fractal with tetracube in the center. Okay? So by completing that geometry, which is platonic in both the case of the electron valence structure and platonic as per Moon at University of Chicago in the geometric structure of the nucleus. So to understand gravity, you must understand implosion caused by recursion. And the same thing is true of self-awareness. And this is why you can create a braid with self-awareness that actually gene pools create coherent motion, which is food for gravity because it actually stabilizes Earth grids. A way to understand that is that if you arrive at a planet and you discover, oops, it's about to lose its atmosphere. Where's that nice little toy, that gyroscope thing? Can you leave it around or something? Oh, there it is. Great, thank you. If you take a gyroscope, see there's just a little gyroscope in here, and pretend that's a planet, okay? Now the planet is spinning on one axis, okay? But then the planet is also spinning on another axis, like this, okay? And then that planet spin is also nutating on a third axis. Now, if I spin this gyroscope, I can actually pump and cause the spin to speed up dramatically by nutating it in phase of the short wave to the long wave. So by creating a way in which the planets spin this way is phase locked to the spin of the zodiac, the precessional nutation pumps the spin of the planet by a cascade recursive from the long wave to the short wave. And that feeds the gravity bubble, and that helps stabilize the implosion that holds atmospheres. And that process is actually what the Arcturians in the book 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy from Owl's Press in London described as the way the Arcturians and others created planet taming, which was, well, here they were saying, we've been traveling for X number of generations, and our problem is we need a planet to terraform that can hold an atmosphere. How do you set about the conditions whereby you hold atmosphere? The way you do that is you plant spin tuners at the tetrahedral leverage points of the planet.